Jack, please, please, please share any books you've enjoyed on the sweet science. Thanks. And that's from Joshua. My favourite book of all time, probably, is Norman Mailer's The Fight, which is just a terrific account of Mailer's time in the run-up to the Rumble in the Jungle, the fight between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali in Zaire. If you're a fight journalist or a fight writer, that's the one you look up to. That's the one you say, God, I wish they did fights like that nowadays. Even though it was a very strange time, it was a very strange thing going on. Don King got Muhammad Ali and George Foreman to agree to fight if he could get them $5 million each, which was unheard of at the time. And the place that he found that money was Zaire, which had just been liberated and then become a dictatorship under Mobutu. And Mobutu was happy to pledge 10 million to this fight to get the name of Zaire on the map. And basically what happened was, in the lead up to the fight, the world sent its press out to Zaire. So you had people like Hunter S. Thompson and George Plimpton and Norman Mailer all hanging out in the one hotel there, along with all the members of the Black Music Festival that was going on at the same time. So you had B.B. King, James Brown, Big Black, the conga player who played an instrument called a conga, which is a big drum, and he was interviewed about it, and they asked him what he played. He said, I play the conga, but this was while the Zaire press were censoring out any use of the word Congo, because it was formerly the Congo. So he ended up playing the Zaire in the magazine interview. But you just had all these celebrities from the literary world and from the music world walking around in the same hotel lobby with guys like Archie Moore and Dick Sadler, George Foreman's team and Muhammad Ali's team. And it got a bit more complicated because a cut got opened up on Foreman, and then the Zairis weren't going to let the fighters leave. They were going to delay the fight, but keep them all in the country. And Mailer's account of it is just absolutely fantastic. If you've seen the film When We Were Kings, it really meshes well with that. There's a lot of Mailerisms in it. He professes that Ernest Hemingway is his idol, but he writes with nothing like the simplicity. He'll say things like, to reach the edge of the heart of darkness, here at the old capital of Joseph Conrad's horror, this Kinshasa, once evil Leopoldville, centre of the slave trade and ivory trade, and to see it through the bilious eyes of a tortured intestine. That's him describing getting the shits on the plane. So he can go a little bit off with that sort of stuff, but he was very friendly with Ali. Went out for morning road work at about 4 a.m. or something like that in the Zaire nighttime. And he was going through an interesting point in his life too. He just signed $1 million book deal, so he'd become a bit famous on his own right. It's just a terrific account of the entire affair. And Mailer is as much of a mark for Archie Moore as I am. So he spent a lot of the camp trying to get to know Archie Moore and not get hustled at ping pong by him and things like that. Great book. Norman Mailer's The Fight. Look it up. I really enjoyed Hands of Stone, the biography of Roberto Duran, with a lot of Duran's own remarks in it. Really long interview with him. Terrific book. Unforgivable Blackness, the book that the Ken Burns documentary was based on, is truly fantastic. As a fight historian, that's one you got to read, because there are very few fighters, spare maybe Muhammad Ali and Joe Louis, that had as much impact on the world at large as Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion of the world. It's worth also noting that Mailer wrote The Death of Perret, which is considered one of the great boxing essays. That's about the death of Benny the Kid Perret at the hands of Emil Griffith, who he called whatever the Spanish equivalent of a faggot is. He called him that, and Emil Griffith was apparently bisexual his entire life. He only came out very near the end of his life. We're talking 2 or 3 years ago, and then he died. But he was very secretive about his love life and personal life, and to be fair, any celebrity should be allowed to be secretive about their love life, and it was a different time. We thankfully have gay boxers who are out nowadays, and quite a few gay female MMA fighters. We're waiting for a major male MMA fighter to come out, but It's just quite a brave thing to do if you are the first gay one to say that you are. So anyway, Perret got beaten to death by Griffith in the ring, and the Mailer account of it is pretty haunting. I would recommend everyone read that. In fact, I would recommend everyone watch that. Because if you're a serious fight fan, like, it's not part of the game you want to watch people die, but you need to understand that this is a sport where you can be legally beaten to death. And watch the fight, read the essay. If you followed my work for any amount of time, you will not be surprised that one of the best boxing manuals that I've ever read was Edwin Hazlitt, who I consider the Bible of striking, basically. His book is it's sort of a compendium of everything that he'd seen before as a boxing coach for a very successful, I think it was a high school team, might have been a collegiate team. The most interesting thing about Hazlitt's book is that he was such a successful coach, but he also allowed a good deal of personal preference in his charges. So he had a list of, I think it was 8 counters to the jab that he considered the most important, and he said that he liked his students to master 2 of them. And then he had he made a list of counterpunches that he liked, and he said that there were over like 700 possible variations of counterpunch that he could think of. And he said that any student should master 2 more of their choice from that 700 counters, basically. It's a really interesting approach to teaching. You say these are the most important ones, but you get your choice, and then the rest of it is up to you. And also, John Walsh was his rival for a while. They had competing boxing teams, and they went back and forward on a lot of like school level Golden Gloves championships. And John Walsh's book came out a little bit later, I think. That's called Boxing Simplified, and it's not nearly as good a book, but it does have some sections where it says this is quite a common strategy, and you'll think, oh yeah, that's an Edwin Hazlitt. Another couple of books that I love are the Champ Thomas series of boxing books. They've been compiled into a pair of books now called How to Be an Ass-Whipping Boxer and Outlaw Killer Punches, I think was the other one. Both of them are terrific. Quite hard to get a hold of new. They haven't made them in years, actually, but quite hard to get a hold of altogether. Very expensive books. I think one of them's online. You'll have to have a look around. But basically, Thomas was a carnival boxer. And carnival boxers and wrestlers are really interesting people to get techniques from. Because while they don't have the techniques necessarily to beat the top professionals in one night, their techniques are always sort of built around keeping them safe, because they're going to be going against 10, 15 dudes each night. So weirdly enough, Thomas's series is also probably the best written material you're ever going to find on what he calls the stone wall, the shoulder roll, the side on guard. I think people call it the Philly shell now, apparently because it was in one of the EA Sports Fight Night games. I prefer stone wall, but whatever you want. The side on behind the shoulder style. And Thomas's whole game was basically hard body jabs, even, which, to be fair, when you say it like that, it sounds a lot like Floyd Mayweather's game. His basic opening the opponent up punch was the body jab, and he'd hide behind his lead shoulder and use that stone wall so effectively. But there are also great sections in Thomas's book just about dealing with roughhouse tactics and delivering roughhouse tactics of your own. He was a big advocate of the when the opponent bends forward at the waist, you throw a right hook that you deliberately miss across the top of their head, and you just slam your forearm down on the back of their neck. Ray Safo did that to Bob Sapp during their fight. It's a nasty piece of work, that punch, and he's just got a whole book full of them. He's saying things. I got a question in the mailbag this week. I didn't make it through, sorry. But I got a question about striking with the forearms and wrists, what they call koteuchi, I believe, in karate. But yeah, if you look at like the inside of your wrist, just swinging that into someone's head. And Champ Thomas was a big advocate of if the opponent's covering up, just swing your wrist into their wrist, and see if you can do some damage. Great series of books, and he's so full of shit too. It's just fantastic. It's like your granddad when he'd tell you that he saw a band before they were famous, or he once gave a knockdown punch to a world champion who came to town, and he only trained sometimes, just absolutely full of bollocks, but really quite a clever guy. He knew how to sell himself. The flim flam. Well, Jesus, the more I say about him, the more he sounds like Floyd Mayweather in another life. Continuing on the personal method of boxing sort of theme, I'm a big fan of Georges Carpentier. His book called My Method, Boxing as a Fine Art, is really interesting. He was the founder of what they called the French School of, what he called the French School of Boxing. At the start of the 1900s, the French didn't give much of a shit about boxing. They cared more about savate. But there was a big war going on between the English method of upright boxing, Jim Driscoll, Jimmy Wilde, jab, move away, a gentleman never engages in the infight, and then the American school of boxing, which was to get to the infight and hit with both hands. And Carpentier, being an outside observer with none of the jingoism or patriotism or whatever, he was the first guy to really start combining them both, because he didn't have a dog in the fight. And he fought I think he's the only fighter to have fought in every weight class, because he started boxing when he was like 12 years old professionally or something like that. So he was right down by minimum weight, and worked his way all the way up to a heavyweight title shot at one point against Jack Dempsey. And was a war hero and all sorts of other stuff. Really interesting guy. But his book basically, it's more like his own personal musings on boxing, and the most interesting thing is how he treats each fight as an individual thing. He's not like we talk a lot about fighters who ask a lot of questions, like their style has specific questions for each opponent they face, and then we talk about fighters who bring the answers. And Carpentier was a guy who preferred to prepare something special for whoever he was fighting, rather than rely on the old stuff that he uses in every fight. So there's a good account of his fight with Bomber Wells and all sorts of other things, just folding behind the elbows. He's got about 4 different guards in the book, where he's like, oh, when I was fighting so and so with a very good left hook to the liver, I made sure I was using this guard and that guard and all the other stuff. And he also he recounts punches that knocked him down. He says, looking back, maybe I should have done this, but I certainly learnt an interesting technique from getting knocked down by that. Really special guy, Georges Carpentier. Very good book. Gene Tunney is another guy with a remarkably candid book available. His book was called A Man Must Fight. He was famous for being the man who beat Dempsey. And the American public didn't warm to him as much as they did Dempsey, because Dempsey was he was a gentleman at all times, except when he was fighting, and he was an absolute murderer. And when he did knock out Carpentier, he bound across the ring to pick him up immediately and check on him and raise his hand and all that sort of stuff. Tunney, he never had that killer instinct. He was always more of a mover. Some people credit him with inventing circling out, because he had to fight Jack Dempsey in like a 16-foot ring or something like that. That was when they were still allowing you to like dictate the ring size as the champion. And he used to quote Shakespeare a lot, and he was a real reader. Idolized Gentleman Jim Corbett, and like they shared diagrams of footwork and things like that. But his book it's not like a technical manual. It is an account of his life. But he talks about his decisions in the ring. He said, I don't like turning my hips into my punches. I just like to push my punches out from the arm, because I find they get there quicker and they do the job of snapping someone's head back while I run away. And of course, it's one of the best accounts you'll read of Harry Greb, because Gene Tunney had a pair of fights with Harry Greb, and Harry Greb is probably, if you ask fight historians who they wish there was film of, I'd always say someone like Kid McCoy, but most people would say Harry Greb, and I would agree, because he was supposed to be incredible. He was just a whirlwind of motion. So yeah, that's definitely worth a read. I've prattled on for a while about boxing books. You could say Pierce Egan's Boxiana, very famous compilation of all his sort of work. AJ Liebling is the other one that everyone always goes on about, This Week's Science. There's a ton of stuff about it. Ask me again next week. In fact, ask me about any sort of books, because I've got heaps of them just behind me, and I love recommending them to people.